Yeah, so in other news, like we saw the MQ-9 be tested with Saab's LoyalEye, which is a podded AEW solution based off of the Erieye, which I thought was quite interesting and actually is a quite interesting application of these male UAVs, which we are seeing increasingly that they are really not capable of surviving these high, these really contested, hot environments. They're quite they're sitting ducks. They're quite easily taken out, and it's something we'll actually touch on very in the next segment. Is they're quite easily taken out. So we're not really seeing massive deployments of them in conflicts now. Ukraine, I think, has died down with TB2 deployments. The Azeris use them with a lot of success, but also, it's kind of also, Armenia not having the capability to be able to intercept them. But we don't have, a lot of near peer, high end adversaries like Iran, like India, they do have the capability to intercept them, and that's something we'll touch on soon with the 59 losses. But we see these drones are being pulled back from the front lines and being deployed more in like an ISR role now. And I think the LoyalEye is a very interesting solution and a very interesting repurposing of these drones. The Pakistan Air Force has bought, I don't know, there's no clear idea of numbers, but it's not a significant number. But the Pakistan Air Force has procured Akinci UAVs. And while the Akinci was always positioned by Baykar as like a really, really high end strike capable UAV, and it carried a multitude of sensors, including an AESA radar in the nose, BVR missiles, and basically everything. It just carried everything in effect. But the ability for it to deploy those effectively is obviously we're not. It's not very clear, and we have seen Akincis being lost in places like Sudan, to air defense. And that's where I think the whole idea of repurposing them come into play, and the LoyalEye being a very interesting solution. So what the LoyalEye is, and we don't have any performance numbers, Saab hasn't really told us anything, but what we can see is it's a solution comprising of three pods, two underwing and one underbelly, two underwing pods which probably carry an array each. So they'll scan. Each array will scan on its own side. So you're probably not gonna, you won't have a 360-degree capability, which the Erieye never had. That's based off of an assumption at the moment. And then in the center, you've got what is probably going to be like a data link pod. So it's not something that has to be built into the airframe, and it's something that's modular and can be removed. So it's quite an interesting play on things, right? You've now got potentially a really capable sensor on these UAVs, which would have effectively been sitting ducks in a conflict, and now they could be used as like really, really key enablers to fill like coverage gaps, for example. Like, for example, if you look at this in a Pakistan Air Force context, the Pakistan Air Force has a very significant number of Erieyes and airborne early warning aircraft. So it might not even be the best example to use, but for a country that's not got tons of AWACS, actually India might be a good example of this, as India doesn't have a ton of airborne early aircraft, warning aircraft, and AEW aircraft are really expensive. They're not a cheap asset, and they're very, and procurement isn't easy, and they take a while. Conversions take a while, and sourcing airframes and all this stuff. It's not straightforward or easy. But for someone like India, who already operates high altitude, medium altitude, and high altitude, long endurance UAVs, and even the MQ-9, this could be a really interesting solution to be able to fill those coverage gaps in the nearer term. As the program develops, where it's probably something that's going to start being offered for export with MQ-9s, but also potentially on other systems as well. And this is where, if the Turks can, build some sort of collaborative partnership with Saab, it could be a very interesting use of the Akinci, where you've now not only got, Erieyes, with personnel on board, but you've also now got your UAVs filling in coverage gaps, or even being used as enablers for like long range targeting over the horizon for like the Pakistan Navy's smash equipped boats or coastal batteries. Or the point is if it would basically take what as an asset that wouldn't be very survivable, move it far back from the danger zone, but also allow it to act as a key enabler and give it a really, really important capability to be able to ensure that you're able to fight effectively.
So to be honest, I always expected the Akinci and even like the Wing Loon and these like larger UAV platforms within the PF to basically be primarily ISR platforms. I never understood, even from the beginning, why they were being presented as strike options. Like, even if you were to, like, let's say, limit it to the idea of counterinsurgency, counterterrorism operations. Like these larger UAVs are pretty costly to operate once you account for the fact that you're not operating many of them to begin with. So
Yeah.
you have like a higher overhead. Yeah, they have their own particular quirks and issues you have to sort of deal with. You have to dedicate, a lot of personnel to them. So it always made more sense that, okay, if you were going to use these HALE UAVs, it would be in the context of a high cost mission application. And that would basically be like things like airborne early warning. So, for example, you can have a situation where within the PAF's case, you can deploy the Akinci with a, podded radar system configuration. Ideally, the Saab LoyalEye, and we can get into a bit of the Saab conversation as well a little later, but like you ideally deploy them in concert with your actual crewed Erieye systems. You might be able to deploy them a little bit further into the combat situation. So maybe not within the combat environment itself, but maybe your crewed AWACS will operate further back, and this would operate somewhere in the middle to help that AWACS sort of have like a forward node they can kind of relay to and relay back from, and then kind of provide like a bigger radar, like a meshed radar image to your fighter aircraft, for example. And then from there you kind of build on top of that system, so you can have like things like autonomous warfare capabilities for your UCAVs. You can have like other like mesh systems going on with your munitions. Obviously you can have your fighter aircraft's radars speak to each other and speak to this directly, so independently of the pilot. So there's so much stuff, and this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, is that the importance of building an independent network architecture for this stuff. The reason why you don't want to go for an out of the box solution, whether it's with China or Turkey, is because you won't be able to do this kind of stuff on your own, right? And I think that's where the potential is, that you want to be able to like plug in different sensor nodes and then build on top of that like autonomous, let's say the nodes speaking to each other, and then have the nodes speak to the munitions and back and forth. So that's where all this stuff is going. Like when we come back, if we were to come back here, if we're fortunate enough, within our Quwa headquarters and, wherever, within our nice fancy building in 10, 15 years, we would like talk about this stuff, right? And that maturing. But now in relation to that, you'd mentioned that, look, this is like right now something Saab is partnering with General Atomics, right? Basically to offer, to customers. So with General Atomics or Boeing? Which one's
No, it
the
is General Atomics and Saab.
to General Atomics? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you see something like the PEF going to Saab and requesting the LoyalEye alongside the Erieye ER and other things? And what could be the pressure point for that?
The problem is, and I feel for Saab, is they're in a very unfortunate position now. Is Saab needs to sell, right? That's Saab's job. Is they need to sell, and the problem is there's Pakistan isn't really buying anything at the moment, so they're trying to establish a footprint in India, foothold in India. But the problem is the Pakistan Air Force keeps using their technologies very effectively against the market they're trying to capture, which is a great show for Saab, but it's not buying much favor in India. That Saab is, and just to note, Saab has publicly said that they will no longer be supporting Pakistan and providing systems to Pakistan, but we know that's untrue because we know Saab is under the table, continue to sell Erieyes to Pakistan, continue to upgrade the Erieyes of Pakistan, and just to clarify, I don't mean to Erieye ER standard, but there are, yeah, if you have a look at a late batch area and the original batch Erieyes, you will see visible differences on the aircraft in terms of sensors. So Saab has continued to upgrade the systems of Pakistan and continue to supply areas to Pakistan, but also Saab has continued to supply air defense and also, on top of that, electronic warfare equipment. In fact, the GIDS Spider counter UAS system relies very heavily on Saab technologies. In fact, I believe the ESM system is even the Saab Sirius series. So, Saab is continuing to work with Pakistan. They just don't want it to be known so they can get that stronghold in India. And now with stuff like the LoyalEye and the area, I'm sure the Pakistan Air Force would love to get their hands on this stuff. We need to be able to deploy these. We can deploy our Akincis as airborne early warning aircraft, as enablers for long range strikes and for maritime strikes and for ISR and everything. But I think Saab is going to be in a very tough position where they either need to basically at that point write off the Indian market or find a way to do this stuff kind of under the cover. Maybe if the Turks and the Saab end up partnering up, maybe it's something that can be routed via them. But the point is it's something I'm sure the Pakistan Air Force would love to get their hands on. I think it's just a very politically tricky situation for Saab to navigate. If Saab does end up writing off their adventures in the Indian market, I think they have a guaranteed customer in Pakistan for the long term.
So, I think the PF would have had a lot more trouble procuring things from a company like Saab, or even for that matter, Leonardo and many others back in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. But as we hit 2020 and onward, it became pretty apparent to a lot of, defense companies, especially within the West, that the Indian market does sway between certain main columns. So, for example, you obviously have the Russians; they maintain a very strong presence there. You have obviously the French that have established themselves quite well, and then you're followed by the Americans, right? And what ends up happening is that a lot of the smaller players that would have banked on the Indian market end up losing out quite a bit. So, a very classic example is Denel Group from South Africa. So I remember, when we first started writing in Quwa, I would say, in the years before that, it wasn't uncommon to hear, for example, and I would ask offhand to people like, hey, why doesn't the Pakistan Air Force get the A-Darter? Why didn't we get the Umkhonto air defense system? And this is like, the late 2000s, early 2010s. And the issue was that, they would say, well, the Denel and the South Africans, they were trying to push forward with BRICS. They see a bigger market in India, so on and so forth. And then by the mid 2010s, that didn't work out. They tried pivoting to Pakistan. So in 2017, South Africa signed like this massive MOU with Pakistan on co-developing different technologies. Pakistani officials from NESCOM and SPD basically, visited Denel's facilities. And then around 2018, Edge Group from the UAE bought up all the talent from within Denel, and we weren't able to leverage that. But this is the issue, that Denel essentially, stopped being the South African defense powerhouse because you could argue they had many issues, no doubt, but a big problem was that they banked on the Indian market. They went for the carrots that were being lured, and as a result, they lost the Pakistani market. They lost like the Army's air defense tender to China. They lost the PAF's air defense tender to obviously MBDA in Italy. They lost many other requirements, and there's like a lot of potential that you could have leveraged, especially through the JS-17 program, and all that hollowed out and fell down the floor, and that company went down, right? Saab was a bit smarter in that they kind of caught on to some issues pretty early on. In the heyday of, let's say, keeping Pakistan in the closet, it was about trying to get that fighter tender for the Gripen.
Yeah.
So they were marketing the Gripen to India. They went through like the MMRCA, then they went to the MRFA, and then at the end of the day, the Indian Air Force decided they wanted the Rafale. Then obviously the Indian industry had already had a Gripen level fighter in Tejas. What was the space for the Gripen, right? And then you want to talk about AWACS. Well, India, again, DRDO has a domestic airborne early warning program. Obviously, they have, the Indian Air Force has good relationships with the Israeli industry like Elbit. Again, they can get this kind of stuff from other places. So at the end of it all, the main markets that Saab has in India, I believe, are in artillery, in anti personnel carryable anti-armor or anti-tank weaponry, like the Carl Gustav.
Yeah.
Pretty small things, like not like big things. Like you could argue at this point, at this time, they have a bigger market to defend in Pakistan at this moment, because what's going to happen with the Erieye, and this is what we kind of argued in Quwa, is that for the PAF, the next phase is to get even longer range airborne early warning platforms, right? So the PAF could approach this, and again, this might have to be done through let's say innovative and creative ways, but the PAF could say, look, we need a global eye level platform down the line to help us build even longer range situational awareness into the Indian side or into our adversary side, so that we can conduct our operations more safely. Because our Erieyes, as they are right now, they're, in 10, 15 years, they're not going to necessarily cut it for a conventional war in the future, right? So we need we have a VIP jet platform. We have, within the PAF, you have the Bombardiers, you have within the PN, you have the Embraers. There's a potential here where you could maybe leverage Saab's help to develop, I say develop in quotes, to get the Erieye ER platform here.
Yeah.
Get the LoyalEye, because the thing is, despite Pakistan's fiscal issues and what have you, if they decide that they're going to acquire X, they will put money towards X, and you will secure the X contract. that is like when something is considered non-negotiable, it gets executed. And then that's how the J10 deal was signed. That's how the first Erieye deal was signed. That's how the F-16 deal, like this stuff gets pushed through the door. That is not something you get within India. Not because India, I think some of them might have been doing this like intentionally to like lure a bigger contract just to sort of dissuade vendors from working with Pakistan, but eventually that stops working. And I think it stopped working. I think, even though recently they unbanned Leonardo,
Yeah.
from what I understand, didn't change Leonardo's approach. They're like, we're not idiots, right? We understand what's going on, so we don't care. Like, because at the end of the day, it's like with a lot of these vendors, they have so many other markets, and they know the Indian market, as big of a cash cow as it is, it's very limited to a certain set of favorites.
Yeah.
And if you're not and if you didn't reach that list of favorites before, you're not going to suddenly reach it out of nowhere. Like, and plus the other thing is Saab structurally, they don't have as much to offer to India directly as, let's say, a France or a French industry would. Because if you notice, a lot of Saab's products, they also rely on external market integration, external market inputs. Like, I don't, like, there might be some very minor semiconductor work happening in Sweden, but a lot of it gets sourced from Germany and stuff for the radars, right? A lot of like the air platforms that come from different markets, like even for example, the Gripen, the flight control system, I think was sourced from the UK. Like, I mean, the point being is that Saab is a very good integrator.
Yeah.
And that is the key. So the Indians would have snuffed this out, and it would just be a very poor business decision from Saab to like jettison the box. Because the problem is, if you're basically an integrator, then nothing stops a Turkey from replacing you.
Yeah.
Like nothing.
And the one other interesting thing with Saab, and this is just touching back on, well, so firstly, in terms of Saab, if you look at the Royal Thai Air Force and their recent deal with Saab, I believe it was over the Thai, they bought Gripen E's and Gripen E/Fs to modernize their Air Force. And one of the key components of this was that Saab would help them develop a next generation data link architecture, or T-Link. And that, it was like 130% offset agreement, But so Saab would basically develop a next generation custom data link architecture for the Royal Thai Air Force, linking the Gripens, their airborne early warning, and their naval ships all together, alongside and assist local companies in doing so. And as you mentioned, the Pakistan Air Force could develop, in air quotes, NASTAP has their own airborne early warning program. NASTAP could, in air quotes, develop an airborne early warning system loosely modeled on the Erieye on the global platform, which obviously, as we know, the Pakistan Air Force is now using as their next generation, as the foundation of their next generation jammer, standoff jammer aircraft. So, there are like low noise ways to like approach a lot of this stuff, and I think Saab's expertise in data link and communication architectures would be very, very valuable to the Pakistan Air Force. And also particularly when we consider that Saab next year intends to fly a fighter-sized unmanned low observable aircraft. So that's, in all likelihood, Saab is probably developing these data link systems and architectures in-house for that kind of application, which is also what the Pakistan Air Force is going to need. Because, when we look at Baykar, it's not something that they're developing in-house, it's something that they're relying on other Turkish vendors for. But for Saab, they can do all of this stuff in-house. So it creates an interesting solution for the Pakistan Air Force. Is the Pakistan Air Force at some point is going to need a next generation fighter. It's also going to need an airborne early warning system that's capable of interlinking with these next generation fighters, but also these next generation nodes like your type UCAVs. And Saab is kind of like one of the only companies, well, if not the only company available to Pakistan that is able to do all of the things that Pakistan needs all at once and by itself without relying on outside assistance.
Yeah, and the other part of it is that this is primarily like knowledge, engineering, expertise work. So it's very hard to, track where that's going, how that's going, right? So a lot of it is like essentially the Saab bringing in expertise to a place like NASTAP to help them develop this stuff. And then you have big, or maybe not even NASTAP, like NASTAP, Baykar. Like, I could plausibly see like some sort of, let's say, unofficial, unwritten sort of consortium building out here where they just develop the stack, the foundations of it, and then each of them goes their separate ways and sells it to other people, basically. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if this is where these things are going, because it's going to be in high demand very soon, and obviously there's some big money behind it, and everybody sort of benefits out of it. I think that's a big one. Like, whatever Saab would develop with, NASTAP and what have you for the PEF and PN and the Army even. I mean, if you think about it, like the idea of even like integrating an active early warning system into a drone even opens the Army, Pakistan Army up for these sorts of operations, basically, to start leveraging and this kind of solution, because they themselves also have an interest in this stuff, because they have a growing air
The
defense
Navy as well.
capability.
You know,
Yeah, like that.
capability the
They
Navy's
have a
had
growing,
for
yeah.
decades. Since before I was born, the Navy's wanted airborne early warning capabilities. And this seems like a very, very easy way for them to acquire this. They're looking to acquire this via the Sea Sultan, which is like a secondary role of it, right? Like the radar, the surface radar is a secondary airborne mode, but it's not going to be anywhere near as capable as something like a dedicated sensor for this, like the LoyalEye. So it's a really, like, Saab is like such a like an amazing market opportunity here. Like, the tri services would be all over this, and in reasonable numbers as well. This is like, Saab is sitting on a multi-billion-dollar gold mine here in